In today's video, we're going to cover one of my favorite topics, which is practicing. First, I think it's important to distinguish all the different things that can encompass what it means to practice. Things like planning, warming up your body and mind, warming up on your instrument, practicing fundamental skills, learning new music, resolving challenges, researching and making informed decisions, performance practice. There are multiple ways that we zoom in and out as we practice, and in this video I want to cover more specifically zooming in to learn new music, resolve technical challenges, work up tempo, and increase confidence. Before we dive into specific practice methods, I want to address the broader and critical topic of mindset and how we can structure our practice. We might as well be using science-based, research-backed information versus aimlessly going about it. That's not to say that it's not sometimes very necessary and fun to have an aimless practice session where you're just playing for fun, because we need that too. Psychologist Dr. Anders Ericsson has researched expertise and coined the term deliberate practice. His book, Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise, is a fantastic resource for understanding optimal improvement and how to practice really well. To paraphrase some of the key principles from his book, deliberate practice is about informed practice. To know if you're practicing deliberately, you can ask yourself some of these key questions. What have experts in my field already figured out, and am I implementing those ideas and techniques? Where am I operating just in my comfort zone, and how can I expand out of my comfort zone? Am I giving the task my full attention, or am I just going through the motions? Is my mental representation vivid, and do I know what I want it to sound like in my head? And do I have an effective means of gathering feedback? He also talks about the 3 F's of deliberate practice: focus, feedback, and fix it. A great way to stay in this deliberate practice mindset and to get quick feedback is to take short recordings or videos, and the Modacity app is built upon the idea of deliberate practice of focus, feedback, and fix it. So it has a built-in short recording right in the app, which is super beneficial. Another really interesting and helpful way to structure your practice based on science and research is through interleaved practice versus block practice. In block practice, we dedicate one large chunk of time to one task before moving on. And in interleaved practice, we take multiple tasks, make them into smaller chunks, and intentionally randomize them and come back to them. This idea was first introduced to me by the flute professor at the University of Southern Mississippi, Danilo Mazzadri, who created the spider log method, which is a means of utilizing interleaved practice and recording your practice. Studies have shown that interleaved practice can help us with retention, memory and recall, and problem solving. I personally love this method because I can tend to overthink and overpractice if I get stuck on one thing for too long. So interleaved practice and putting on my timers for 3 to 5 minutes per task keeps me fresh and focused. I like to use this when I have a large list of audition excerpts. It's so helpful. I'll leave links below for more information on all these resources. Okay, so now let's move into some of the specific practice methods for zooming in, learning new music, resolving tricky passages, and working up tempo. The most basic means of practicing and learning new music is through repetition. But for myself and my students, we have a rule, which is if we play something 3 times in a row and it's not going how we want, we stop and change something. It's a sign to think slower and smaller so we can control our success rate and avoid getting frustrated. Because we don't want to ingrain difficulty and frustration, we want to ingrain ease and confidence. So here are some of the ways you can change it up. The first is my favorite metronome practice method, which is up 10, down 5. It is perfect for increasing tempo on something difficult. I first learned of up 10, down 5 in a Contrabass Conversations podcast episode with Lauren Pierce, who has an entire course on practicing, and I'll leave a link to that episode down below. Basically, you're gonna start super slow and increase the tempo by 10 clicks, lower by 5, then by 10, down by 5, up by 10, down by 5. And I find that this method is so helpful for settling in to any tempo. It makes us settle slower while we're inching up the speed, which is different than simply inching up the speed. It gives us a chance to relax into a tempo that is faster than where we started, but slower than where we just were. And I think that's what's so helpful about it. For myself and my students, it's possible to easily surpass your tempo goal using this method. The next method is deepening your understanding by finding patterns. Karg-Elert Caprices can tend to be a great place to utilize this because there can be seemingly random, difficult chunks and passages. As an example, let's look at Karg-Elert Caprice number 10 at measure 8. So let's find the scalar or linear patterns and how many there are. So starting from the first notes going down. starting with the first C sharp, anything that ascends. Hearing those two ideas separately can give us a really natural way of hearing the phrasing of both ideas, and it turns a jumble of difficult notes into something that makes more sense. The next method is air fluting. It's so helpful to have a clear, intentional tactic for listening to your air and for removing sound as an element. I use this method the most in things that are tricky for breathing and things that are articulated, where breathing and phrase and flow can start to feel stifled or jumbly. I'm going to use the first movement of the Ibert Concerto so I can listen to my air and feel myself breathing as I tongue through these notes to make sure I have a sense of flow and phrase. It removes the pressure and distraction of sound if we're having trouble feeling confident and flowing through. We're less likely to be distracted by wrong notes or cracked notes. Other great places to use this one are the Mendelssohn Scherzo Excerpt and Afternoon of a Faun to practice breath management and to see where am I giving too much air if I'm running out too soon. If you tend to have difficulty lining up your air and tonguing and sound and hearing the metronome, air flute is a perfect tactic for resolving that. Another bonus for this one is that our air and fingers tend to like to be tied together in terms of intensity and effort. So if fingers are working hard, sometimes air is overly intense or pushing or forcing, and vice versa. If the air is pushing and forcing, the fingers might follow suit. So you can listen to the fingers and the air and calm both into a more efficient means of using your energy. The next method is what I call the mindful tally method, and it's probably the most rooted in repetition. My number one example for this method is the Firebird excerpt. When it was time for me to just sit down and stop procrastinating and learn this excerpt deeply for confidence, this is the method that I used. I set my metronome to an extremely slow eighth note equals 60, and I kept a piece of paper so I could tally for every single line or phrase. And I was aiming to get to 10 tallies of each being a successful, accurate, confident, easy, flowing, no questions or doubts tally. I also really like to use singing and playing while doing these super slow reps. Always keep in mind those easy, effortless, fundamental ideas as you're going through. Careful not to get tunnel vision or tight. Stay open to the space. Breathe really well. You can go back to air fluting if you feel like you need to find flow again. And if you need to familiarize yourself with something challenging, try this method. The next are ways to change groupings and rhythms around if you have technical difficulties. I'm going to use the second movement from Bach's C major sonata because I find this first line really difficult for the right hand to be even and smooth if you're using this as a double tonguing exercise especially. First is dotted rhythms. Doing the dotted rhythms both ways gives every pair of notes a chance to be the fast moment, and you can easily tell which are awkward to move quickly. So you're kind of waking up the fingers. Next, I'm going to hold particular notes to change rhythms and groupings around. The next method is changing groupings by adding a pause or rest. In this example, I'll do 2 notes with a pause, 4 notes with a pause, and it's such a good way to practice playing fast, but in reasonable chunks, so you don't have to keep going continuously if we're not ready yet. Next, we'll do 5 notes going into the next downbeats with a pause. method is add a note. Start with the first note and add on, and also do add a note backwards. Start with the last note and play the preceding notes until you've started from the beginning. Let's use Jolivet Chandelino at rehearsal B. I'm going to start with the first note first. And so on. Now let's start with the note that ends the phrase and add backwards. It's important when doing the backwards method that you're aware of any accidentals that occurred previously. I call the next method the billboard fermata method because putting a fermata on the note you keep missing turns it into a giant billboard that you can't miss. I'm going to use the opening run from the Daphnis and Chloe solo and stop on the F sharp. Adding a pause within faster or technical things gives us a chance to find ease in it as well, so that can be really helpful. In a similar way, we can learn which notes might need a thought tenuto to bring our attention to it. So I might put one on that F sharp. You might find other examples where your attention is going to the note before a difficult note. Maybe it needs to go on that note or after. So play around with adding thought tenutos, changing your microphrasing, and see if that resolves technical challenges by changing where you're emphasizing. Lastly, it can be easy to practice too fast, but it can also be easy to stay stuck too slow and stay in your comfort zone. So if you're having difficulty liberating yourself and freeing yourself and going at full performance speed, practice air fluting along with a recording that goes faster than you might want to go, and you might notice yourself having to let go and follow along and keep up, and it might quiet your brain a little bit if it's overthinking and staying stuck. I like to do this one with the Carnival of the Animals, the Voliere Excerpt, which I can sometimes play too slow and too stuck. As always, thank you so much for watching. There are a million different ways to practice and change things around, and I'd love to hear what your favorites are in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.